The first $200,000 net worth shift. You're tracking your net worth in a spreadsheet, maybe updating it monthly or quarterly, and you watch the numbers slowly climb. $50,000, $75,000, $100,000. And each milestone feels good, sure, but it also feels kind of the same. Like you're still the same person with the same money stresses, just with a slightly bigger number in your accounts. You're still worried about unexpected expenses. You're still feeling like you can't quite relax about money. The number is going up, but your life doesn't feel fundamentally different. But then something strange starts happening somewhere around $150,000 to $200,000 in net worth. You notice that your investment returns in a good quarter are bigger than your monthly savings. You realize that a $2,000 emergency doesn't even register as stressful anymore. You start making different decisions. Not reckless ones, but decisions that come from a place of abundance rather than scarcity. And you think, wait, when did this change? When did I start feeling actually wealthy instead of just less broke? My name is Jack, and I spend way too much time analyzing wealth psychology, studying financial inflection points, and specifically trying to understand the moment when your relationship with money fundamentally transforms in ways that compound into dramatically different outcomes. And what I've discovered is that $200,000 in net worth isn't just another number on the path to a million. It's a psychological and mathematical threshold where the entire game changes in ways most people don't recognize until after they've crossed it. Because here's what's fascinating. The difference between $0 and $50,000 in net worth is huge in terms of effort and discipline required. The difference between $50,000 and $100,000 is still substantial, but the difference between $150,000 and $200,000 isn't just incremental, it's transformational. Something shifts. The wealth starts building itself. Your psychology around money changes, and suddenly you're playing a completely different game than you were playing when you had $50,000. So if you're somewhere on that journey toward $200,000, or if you've already crossed it and you're trying to understand what changed, or if you're wondering whether all this grinding to build wealth actually leads somewhere meaningful, this is for you. Because understanding what happens at the $200,000 threshold might be the most important thing you learn about wealth building this year. The math finally works in your favor. Let's start with the most obvious but still underappreciated aspect of hitting $200,000. The math of compound interest finally becomes visible and meaningful in your everyday life. When you have $10,000 invested and it grows 8% in a year, you make $800. That's nice, but it's not changing your life. It's basically one paycheck. You probably save more than that from your salary in a month or two. The investment returns are a bonus, but they're not the main driver of your wealth building. When you have $50,000 and it grows 8%, you make $4,000. That's better. That's a small emergency fund or a decent vacation. But again, it's probably less than you're saving from your income over the course of a year. Your wealth is still primarily growing from your labor, not from your capital. But when you have $200,000 and it grows 8%, that's $16,000. That might be more than you're able to save from your salary in a year, especially after taxes and living expenses. Your money is now working as hard as you are, or harder. You've crossed the point where your capital is becoming a significant contributor to your wealth building, not just a nice supplement. And this creates a psychological shift that's hard to describe until you experience it. You start checking your investment accounts and seeing them up $3,000 or $5,000 in a month, and you realize that's money you didn't work for in the traditional sense. Your capital worked for you while you were sleeping, while you were at your job, while you were on vacation. You've started to taste what it means to have wealth rather than just income. I remember the first time I saw my net worth increase by $8,000 in a single month, and I'd only contributed $2,000 of savings. The other $6,000 was just market appreciation, my investments doing their thing, and I had this moment of clarity. Oh, this is what compound interest actually feels like. This is why people say to start investing early. This is the beginning of the exponential curve. Because that's what's happening at $200,000. You're reaching the part of the exponential curve where it starts bending upward noticeably. The first $100,000 is the slow, grinding linear phase. The second $100,000 starts showing you glimpses of exponential growth. And from there, it accelerates. If you keep the same savings and investment habits that got you to $200,000, you'll hit $400,000 much faster than it took you to get from zero to $200,000. Not just because you're continuing to save, but because your existing capital is compounding significantly. The math is working with you instead of against you. Your emergency fund actually works. Here's something that changes dramatically at $200,000 that nobody really talks about. Your emergency fund finally feels adequate, and that psychological security transforms how you make decisions. When you have $10,000 in net worth and you're trying to maintain a $5,000 emergency fund, that emergency fund is half your wealth. Every time you touch it for an actual emergency, it's devastating to watch your net worth get cut in half. You rebuild it slowly and painfully, and the whole time you're stressed about another emergency hitting before you've recovered. Even at $100,000 in net worth with a $10,000 emergency fund, emergencies still sting. You're still watching 10% of your wealth disappear when the car needs major repairs or you have an unexpected medical bill. But at $200,000 in net worth, a $5,000 or even $10,000 emergency is just 2.5% to 5% of your wealth. It's noticeable, sure, but it's not devastating. You handle it, you move on, your net worth barely dips on the graph. And more importantly, you recover from it quickly because your investments are growing fast enough to offset these hits. This creates a profound sense of security that affects every aspect of your financial life. You stop living in fear of unexpected expenses. You stop playing defense with every dollar. You can start taking intelligent risks, changing careers, starting a business, investing in yourself, because you have a genuine safety net, not just a theoretical one. I watched this transformation in a friend who crossed $200,000 recently. She'd been terrified of job instability for years, staying in a job she hated because she couldn't afford the risk of leaving. But once she hit that threshold and realized she could survive for over a year on her savings if needed, she finally quit and found something better. The $200,000 didn't just give her financial security, it gave her life options. And that's the shift. Below $200,000, you're still somewhat fragile financially. An extended job loss, a major medical issue, a significant emergency could derail your progress. Above $200,000, you have real resilience. You can absorb shocks. You can take strategic risks. You're playing offense, not defense. The identity transformation. There's this weird psychological thing that happens around $200,000 that's hard to explain, but is absolutely real. You start identifying as someone who has wealth rather than someone who's trying to get it. When you have $30,000 saved, you're working on building financial security. When you have $80,000, you're doing pretty well, making progress. When you have $150,000, you're on track, doing the right things. But somewhere around $200,000, the identity shifts. You're not trying to become financially secure. You are financially secure. You're not working toward wealth. You have wealth. And this identity shift changes your behavior in subtle but powerful ways. You start making decisions like a wealthy person because you see yourself as a wealthy person, even though $200,000 is nowhere near rich in any absolute sense. You become more protective of your capital. When you had $40,000, spending $2,000 on something frivolous felt bad, but not devastating. But when you have $200,000, you think more carefully about those purchases because you're aware that you're stealing from your own compound growth. You've worked too hard to build this capital to waste it carelessly. You also become more strategic about opportunity costs, that $2,000 isn't just $2,000 anymore. It's $2,000 that could compound into $4,000 over the next decade. The mental math changes. You're not just thinking about today's trade-off, you're thinking about future wealth you're giving up. This might sound like it makes you miserable or miserly, but it's actually the opposite. You spend less on things that don't matter to you because you're clear about protecting your wealth. But you can spend freely on things that do matter because you're not operating from scarcity. You're making intentional choices from a position of strength. I noticed this shift in myself around the time I crossed $180,000. I became simultaneously more careful about waste and more generous with meaningful spending. I stopped buying random stuff I didn't need, but I started spending more on experiences I valued and gifts for people I cared about. The identity of being wealthy, even modestly so, made me behave differently in ways that reinforced the wealth building. Lifestyle inflation resistance. Here's a counterintuitive thing. People often become more resistant to lifestyle inflation after crossing $200,000 than they were on the way up. And understanding why this happens reveals something important about human psychology. When you're building your first $100,000, every raise and every windfall feels like permission to upgrade your lifestyle. You've been living frugally for years, and finally you're making progress, so surely you can loosen up a little, right? And this is rational to a point. You don't want to live like a college student forever. But what happens is that people tend to inflate their lifestyle proportionally to their income increases, which prevents capital accumulation from accelerating. You get a $10,000 raise, you increase your spending by $8,000, you only save an additional $2,000. Your absolute savings increase, but your savings rate stays the same or even decreases. However, something changes when you cross $200,000. You've achieved enough security that you don't feel the same pressure to signal success through consumption. You're not trying to prove to yourself or others that you've made it. You know you've made it, at least in relative terms. The psychological need for external validation through spending decreases. Plus, you've now experienced the power of compound growth enough to viscerally understand what you're giving up when you inflate your lifestyle. It's not abstract anymore. You've watched $200,000 become $220,000 in a year through a combination of savings and investment returns. You understand that keeping your lifestyle stable means that next year it could become $245,000, and the year after that, $275,000. The exponential curve is visible now, and you don't want to flatten it by ramping up spending. This is why you sometimes see people who struggled to save when they were making $60,000 suddenly saving aggressively once they have $200,000 in net worth, even if their income hasn't changed that dramatically. They've crossed the psychological threshold where the future wealth feels more real and more valuable than current consumption. I know someone who drove the same 12-year-old car for 3 years after crossing $200,000 in net worth, even though they could easily afford a new one, because they become so focused on reaching $500,000 that every dollar spent on a car felt like a dollar stolen from that goal. That's the shift, from fighting lifestyle inflation out of necessity to choosing to resist it out of strategic focus. Risk tolerance calibration. The $200,000 threshold also recalibrates your risk tolerance in interesting ways, and this affects everything from your career decisions to your investment choices. Below $200,000, most people are fairly risk-averse out of necessity. You can't afford to take big career risks because you don't have enough cushion. You can't invest aggressively because a significant loss would set you back years. You're playing it safe because you have to. But at $200,000, you gain the freedom to take intelligent risks. Not reckless gambles, but strategic bets that could significantly accelerate your wealth building. You can afford to shift to a higher-paying but less stable career. You can invest in a small business or side venture. You can potentially take a year off to develop a new skill or pursue an opportunity. Paradoxically, this often makes people more conservative in some ways and more aggressive in others. More conservative in protecting the capital base, you're not going to blow $200,000 on cryptocurrency speculation or some risky venture. But more aggressive in pursuing high-value opportunities that have real potential because you can afford to take the shot. This is the wealth-building sweet spot. You have enough capital to absorb failures, but not so much that you're playing not to lose rather than playing to win. You can be strategic about risk in ways that simply aren't available to people with less capital. I watched a colleague make this shift beautifully. Once she crossed $200,000, she quit her stable corporate job to join a startup with significant equity upside. It was risky, and she wouldn't have done it with $50,000 in net worth. But with $200,000, she could afford for it not to work out. And because she could afford the risk, she was able to pursue an opportunity that eventually accelerated her wealth building far faster than staying in the safe job would have. The wealth attracts wealth phenomenon. There's this thing that starts happening around $200,000 that sounds almost magical until you understand the mechanics. Wealth starts attracting more wealth. Opportunities that weren't available before suddenly become accessible. Financial institutions start treating you differently. You qualify for better interest rates, better credit cards with better rewards, private banking services. Minimums for certain investment vehicles that were previously out of reach become attainable. You can access deals and opportunities that require capital thresholds. Your network changes too. You're having different conversations with different people. You're around others who have wealth or are building it seriously. Information flows to you that wouldn't have before. Opportunities get mentioned in passing that lead to investment returns or career moves. This isn't some mystical law of attraction. It's just that capital creates access, and access creates opportunity, and opportunity creates more capital. It's a flywheel effect that starts spinning noticeably around $200,000. You also start getting taken more seriously professionally. Whether it's fair or not, people who know you have capital built assume you're competent, disciplined, strategic. This affects hiring decisions, partnership opportunities, business relationships. Your net worth becomes a credential, even though nobody sees your account statements. And perhaps most importantly, you have capital available to deploy when opportunities arise. When a friend's company offers early employee equity, you can actually participate. When a real estate opportunity comes up that requires $30,000 down, you can actually do it without depleting your emergency fund. The opportunities were always there, but now you can actually access them. The beginning of real freedom. Look, $200,000 in net worth isn't rich. You're not retiring early or buying yachts or living some lavish lifestyle. In most expensive cities, it's maybe 2 or 3 years of living expenses. It's not enough to stop working. It's not financial independence. But it is the beginning of real financial freedom. It's the point where money stops being this constant source of stress and anxiety and starts being a tool you can use to build the life you want. It's where the treadmill starts feeling less like a treadmill and more like a path towards something meaningful. The shift from $0 to $200,000 is about survival, discipline, grinding. It's about proving to yourself that you can do this, that you can build wealth, that you're capable of delayed gratification and consistent execution. It's hard, and it takes years, and it often feels like you're not making progress even when you are. But once you cross $200,000, the game changes. You're not grinding anymore, you're strategizing. You're not surviving, you're optimizing. You're not proving you can build wealth, you're deciding how fast you want to build it and what you want to do with it. This is why wealthy people often say the first $100,000 is the hardest, the second $100,000 is easier, and everything after that accelerates. They're not exaggerating, they're describing the mathematical and psychological reality of crossing this threshold. So if you're working toward $200,000 right now, keep going. The grinding is temporary, the shift is real, and what's waiting on the other side is genuinely different from where you are now. Not just in the number, but in how you think, how you feel, how you move through the world, and how fast you can continue building wealth from there. You're closer to transformation than you probably realize.